I stood in that ballroom wearing diamonds he bought me, watching my husband slow dance with the woman who broke his heart. Everyone waited for me to cry, to scream, to fall apart. But baby, I just smiled. Because what I was about to do, that would make headlines for years. Before I tell you how I dismantled a billion-dollar empire with nothing but patience and a smile, hit that subscribe button. Because this story? It's about to show you exactly what happens when a powerful man forgets who really built his kingdom. Now let me take you back to where it all began, because you need to understand something. I didn't marry Garrett Sullivan for his money. When I met him, he didn't have any. My name is Diana Morrison, and 8 years ago I was a financial consultant making decent money, building my reputation one struggling company at a time. That's when Garrett walked into my office, and honey, let me tell you, this man was not the billionaire you see in magazines. He was broken, desperate, $50 million in debt with a real estate company circling the drain. His fancy hotel chain was bleeding money, his investors were running, and the woman he'd planned to marry, Caroline Whitmore, had left him the moment his bank account started looking questionable. But I saw something in those numbers that nobody else did. I saw potential. I saw strategy. I saw a way out of that mess that would take work, patience, and a whole lot of late nights, so I took him on as a client. We spent 6 months restructuring everything. I renegotiated contracts, found new investors, created partnerships in Dubai and London that people said were impossible. I turned his $50 million nightmare into a $500 million comeback. And somewhere between the spreadsheets and the strategy sessions, somewhere between watching him learn to fight again and seeing him trust my vision, we fell in love. When Garrett proposed, he was honest with me. He said, "Diana, you saved my life. You saved my business. I don't know where I'd be without you." I believed him. We got married in a small ceremony because he still wasn't flashy with money yet. He'd learned his lesson about excess, or so I thought. I became his wife and his chief financial officer, and together, we built an empire. Not just a company, baby, an empire. Within 5 years, we went from $500 million to $2 billion. We had luxury hotels in 12 countries. We had resort properties that celebrities begged to book. We had investment portfolios that made Wall Street nervous. And I did that. Let me be clear about this because it matters for what comes later. I structured every major deal. I built relationships with investors who trusted my word over anyone else's. I created the financial strategies that turned luxury hotels into billion-dollar assets. Garrett was the face, sure. He was good at shaking hands and giving speeches. But I was the brain, the backbone, the reason any of it worked. We had twin daughters, beautiful 5-year-old girls who had their daddy's smile and their mama's sharp mind. Life looked perfect from the outside. But around year 6, things started changing. Garrett's confidence came back, which was good, except it came back with amnesia. He forgot what it felt like to be desperate. He forgot who answered the phone at 2 a.m. to talk him through panic attacks about bankruptcy. He forgot who sacrificed her own consulting firm to build his dream. His old social circle started creeping back in, the same people who disappeared when he was broke. And right at the center of that circle, like a spider in a web, was Caroline Whitmore. She came back with apologies and excuses, talking about how she'd made a mistake, how she'd been young and scared, and Garrett, fool that he was becoming, ate it up. I noticed things. Small things at first. The way he'd laugh a little too loud at her jokes during charity events. The way he'd forget to mention me when telling stories about the company's success. How board meetings suddenly included her opinions on matters she knew nothing about. But I stayed quiet. I watched. I documented. Because I learned a long time ago that smart women don't react, they prepare. Then came our 7th anniversary. Garrett wanted to throw this massive gala at our flagship hotel in Manhattan, the crown jewel of our empire. 500 guests, a full orchestra, ice sculptures, the whole excessive display. I planned most of it, of course, because that's what I did. I handled the details while he handled the spotlight. I bought a white silk gown that cost more than my first car, wore my hair natural in an elegant updo that took 3 hours, and put on the diamond necklace Garrett had given me for our 5th anniversary. I looked like money. I looked like power. I looked like a woman who belonged exactly where she was. The ballroom was stunning that night. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, roses imported from Ecuador. Everyone who mattered in our world was there. And then Garrett stood up to give a speech. I sat at our table, smiling, expecting him to do what he always did, talk about our partnership, our family, our journey. Instead, he thanked his team. He thanked his investors. He thanked people who'd doubted him and people who'd believed in him. He mentioned my name once, called me his supportive wife, like I was some accessory who smiled pretty at parties. The table shifted uncomfortably. Our friends knew better. They knew the truth. But Garrett was on a roll, basking in applause, forgetting who wrote the blueprint he was bragging about. Then Caroline showed up. She wasn't on the guest list, let me make that clear, but there she was, gliding through the ballroom in an emerald dress, all confidence and calculated charm. She made her way to our table, and Garrett lit up like Christmas morning. They hugged a little too long. She complimented the event, and he soaked it in like he'd planned every detail himself. I sipped my champagne and watched this performance with the patience of a woman who'd already seen the ending. The orchestra started playing, some slow, romantic melody that made people pull their partners close, and then Garrett did the unthinkable. He stood up, extended his hand to Caroline, and asked her to dance. Not his wife. Not the woman who'd spent 7 years building everything he was celebrating. Her. The woman who abandoned him when times got hard. The ballroom went silent in that specific way that means everyone's watching without wanting to look like they're watching. Heads turned toward me. I could feel the weight of 500 pairs of eyes waiting for my reaction, waiting for me to cry, to yell, to throw my champagne in his face and storm out. But I didn't do any of that. I smiled, a soft, unbothered smile. I took another sip of my champagne, crossed my legs, and watched my husband slow dance with his ex-girlfriend on our anniversary. Let me tell you what was really happening in that moment, though. While everyone thought I was frozen in shock or playing it cool to save face, I was working. I pulled out my phone under the table and made 3 calls, 3 very specific, very important calls that I'd prepared months ago, just in case I ever needed them. The first call was to Bernard, our biggest investor in London. I asked him to activate Clause 7 in our partnership agreement, the one that allowed early withdrawal if company leadership showed instability. The second call was to my lawyer, telling her to file the divorce papers first thing Monday morning. The third call was to my accountant, authorizing the transfer of certain assets that Garrett had forgotten were in my name only. Those 3 calls took less than 5 minutes. I made them while watching my husband sway with another woman to a song that clearly meant something to both of them. And I kept smiling. When the dance ended, Garrett came back to the table looking relieved that I hadn't caused a scene. He kissed my forehead like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just disrespected me in front of everyone we knew. I told him the party was beautiful. I told him I was proud of everything we'd built. I meant that last part, actually. I was proud of what I'd built. He just didn't realize yet that we was about to become me and him separately. The next morning, Garrett came home acting normal. I made him breakfast, asked about his plans for the day, kissed him goodbye when he left for the office. He was confused by my calmness, but relieved enough not to question it. Men like Garrett, they want peace without accountability. They want you to swallow disrespect with a smile so they don't have to face what they've done. So I gave him peace. For exactly 1 week. I told him I was taking some personal time, visiting my mother, doing some self-care. He was thrilled, probably thought it meant I was getting over my little hurt feelings. What I was really doing was dismantling his world brick by brick. See, I'd been preparing for this possibility for 6 months, ever since I noticed how he'd changed. I'm not the kind of woman who waits around hoping a man remembers my value. I'm the kind of woman who protects herself while praying she never has to use the protection. Here's what Garrett didn't know. Every major deal I'd structured had clauses that protected my interests. Every international partnership was built on relationships I'd cultivated personally. The investors didn't trust the Sullivan name. They trusted Diana Morrison. I'd kept meticulous records of every contribution I'd made, every strategy I'd created, every time Garrett had made reckless financial decisions behind my back while I was cleaning up his mistakes. I had emails, documents, recordings of meetings where I'd warned him against bad investments that he'd pursued anyway. I had everything I needed to prove that without me, his empire was a house of cards. That first week, I called in favors. Bernard in London pulled his $800 million in planned expansion funding, citing concerns about company direction. Our partners in Dubai requested an emergency review of their contracts. 3 board members who respected my work started asking Garrett hard questions about decisions he'd made without consulting the financial team, meaning without consulting me. His phone started ringing with problems, and for the first time in years, I wasn't there to solve them. Garrett called me panicking. He asked where I was, said he needed my help with the investors, needed me to smooth things over like I always did. I told him I was busy. I'd just launched my own consulting firm, and I had clients who actually valued my expertise. He laughed nervously, thought I was joking. I wasn't. Week 2, things got worse for him. A major hotel acquisition fell through because the sellers wanted to work with me specifically, and I was no longer part of his company. The stock price started dropping as word spread about internal instability. Someone leaked information about Garrett's risky investments to a business journal, investments that could have bankrupted us if I hadn't been there to offset them with profitable deals. The article didn't mention my name, but everyone in the industry knew who'd been keeping that ship afloat. Board members called an emergency meeting. They wanted answers about why key partnerships were dissolving, why investors were nervous, why the financial strategy suddenly seemed non-existent. Caroline, bless her heart, tried to help. She showed up to meetings with ideas that sounded good but meant nothing. She didn't understand the complexities of international finance or investor relations. She knew how to spend money, not make it. Garrett realized too late that charm doesn't restructure debt and pretty words don't negotiate contracts. He needed me. But I was done being needed without being valued. Week 3, my lawyer served him divorce papers at a board meeting. In front of everyone. The prenup we'd signed was ironclad because I'd had my own lawyer write it, not his. It stipulated that any assets I'd brought into the marriage or directly created stayed with me. It gave me 40% of the company's value based on my documented contributions. It granted me full custody of our daughters with detailed evidence of his emotional absence and neglect. And the flagship hotel, the Manhattan property where he'd humiliated me? That was a wedding gift he'd put solely in my name for tax purposes years ago. It was mine completely. Garrett tried to fight it at first. He hired expensive lawyers who quickly realized they had no case. The documents were airtight. My contributions were undeniable. His neglect of our children was documented through nanny testimonies and school records showing I'd attended every event alone. He tried calling me, apologizing, saying he'd made a mistake. I didn't answer. I let my lawyer handle everything because I'd said all I needed to say when I smiled at that gala. I did give one interview, though. A business journalist asked me about the divorce and the company's struggles. I sat in that interview calm and collected, and I simply told the truth. I showed receipts of my work, testimonials from investors, financial records proving my strategies had generated 70% of the company's growth. I didn't trash Garrett. I didn't have to. The numbers spoke for themselves. I just made it clear that Diana Morrison was never just a supportive wife. I was the architect. And when you remove the architect mid-construction, buildings tend to fall. The business world took notice. Within a month, I had consulting offers from 6 major companies. Investors who'd worked with Garrett started reaching out to me directly. My firm grew faster than I'd planned because people knew what I could do. Meanwhile, Garrett's empire continued crumbling. Without my strategic oversight, he made mistake after mistake. The stock dropped 40% in 3 months. He had to sell off properties to cover debts I would have restructured. Caroline left him again when the money got tight, because some people never change who they really are. 6 months after that anniversary gala, I was thriving. My daughters were happy, stable, living in the flagship hotel penthouse that was legally mine. They saw their father on weekends, and slowly, he was learning to actually be present with them. My business was booming. I'd hired a team of brilliant financial minds, and we were transforming struggling companies the same way I'd once transformed Garrett's. I was sleeping better than I had in years. Garrett tried apologizing again. He showed up at my office one day, looking humbled in a way that reminded me of when we first met. He said he'd been a fool, said he'd let success make him forget what mattered, said he didn't appreciate me until I was gone. I listened politely, then I told him something I'd been saving for that moment. I said, "Garrett, I don't accept apologies from people who needed to lose everything to find respect. You didn't value me when I was there. You don't get to value me now that I'm gone. But I do hope you learn something from this for whoever comes next." He asked if there was any chance for us, and I almost laughed. I told him the truth. I said I didn't destroy his company out of revenge or anger. I simply removed myself from the foundation, and without me it crumbled naturally because I was holding up more than he ever realized. That's not revenge, baby. That's consequence. That's what happens when you mistake your blessing for your trophy, when you forget that the quiet woman planning everything is more powerful than the loud man taking credit. Here's what I learned through all of this, and what I want you to understand. Some people mistake kindness for weakness. They think because you don't scream, you don't have teeth. They think because you smile through disrespect, you're accepting it. But that smile I gave at the gala wasn't surrender. It was strategy. It was me choosing my moment, protecting my peace, and preparing my exit while everyone thought I was just being graceful. You don't have to scream to be powerful. You don't have to make a scene to make a statement. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is simply walk away and watch someone try to succeed without you. Let them learn the hard way what you were worth. Let them struggle with the problems you solved silently. Let them realize too late that you weren't just along for the ride. You were driving the whole time. I didn't need revenge, because revenge requires you to stay connected to someone who hurt you. I needed freedom, and I took it. I took my talent, my strategies, my relationships, and my peace of mind, and I built something new that belongs entirely to me. Garrett's struggling empire isn't my concern anymore. My thriving firm is, and that's the real ending to this story. Not that I destroyed a man who wronged me, but that I freed myself from a man who forgot my value. There's a difference. One keeps you tied to bitterness. The other lets you fly toward something better. If this story taught you something about knowing your worth, drop a comment telling me what you would have done. Would you have smiled like I did, or would you have handled it differently? Subscribe because I have more stories about people who learned hard lessons about respect the hard way. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. And remember, never let anyone make you forget what you built. Never let anyone diminish your contributions while enjoying your results. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's letting someone try to stand tall after you stop being their backbone. Protect your peace, know your value, and never apologize for removing yourself from places where you're not honored. Until next time, keep building your empire, and make sure your name is on the foundation.